Can technological universities become transformative? This is the question for the podcast today. My name is Mikk, Vainik, your host here for the BoostEuroTeQ podcast. And as a curious mind, I have a bunch of questions for Professor Erkki Karo from the Nurkse Department of Innovation and Governance here at TalTech. Welcome to the show, Erkki.
Hello.
So, BoostEuroTeQ, what is it? What does it mean for you?
Well, BoostEuroTeQ is actually a small research and innovation project that is part of a larger sort of pan-European endeavor called EuroTeQ.
Mm-hmm.
So we have put together this large consortium of universities trying to renew or reinvent engineering education in Europe in terms of better collaboration, interdisciplinarity, as well as sort of allowing for student mobility. And as part of this, we have this Boost project, which actually kind of contributes then research-based knowledge to the consortia on two elements. One is about then what is often called in our project as engineer of the future. So we try to think about what should be engineering education and engineering skills in the future. And one of the key elements here is that we think, or there is this consensus in EuroTeQ as well, that somehow engineering education, engineering universities, and engineers should become more socially responsible.
Okay.
And what it means is that we take other values than technological perfection, if we can call it like that, into account, which is related to ethics, sustainability, whatever forms of social responsibility. So this is one side of the project, trying to figure out if this is the aim, what should education look like? And the other side is actually about social responsibility. So as a university, we do education, research, but we are also places. Like if you think about TalTech, where we are, it is like a small city.
Mm-hmm.
It has a huge amount of buildings. It has a huge amount of people who either come here to work, study, or pass by. So we have a very big impact on the city of Tallinn as well as in the region, and we have certain responsibilities towards local communities, but sometimes also towards global communities. And then the idea of the project is to think about sort of can we actually, or how should we kind of contribute more to this kind of social responsibility through not only education and forming better engineers, but also through other activities, whether it's research or whether it's how we build our campus. And the Boost project then tries to kind of think about how to do it. And one of the key kind of lenses here is this idea of co-creation,
Right.
which you probably want to know what it is.
Absolutely.
What it is. But the idea here is that if you assume that we need to do things differently in terms of the outputs and outcomes, different kind of research, different kind of interactions with the community, maybe we should also design our internal processes differently. And the idea of co-creation is opening up existing processes, whether it's education, whether it's research, or whatever we do in our campuses, to different types of stakeholders. First of all, it's about a little bit about interdisciplinarity, working together across different silos of science and research to contribute to sustainability. But the other side is also opening these processes up to other stakeholders, whether it's students, local communities, and try to, on the one hand, co-define what the heck are the problems of the world we need to deal with, and the other side also sort of co-produce solutions to joint research innovation activities.
All right. Well, that was a very rich introduction. Thank you. And I guess by this we could already call it a day because it was gave a very good overview of what BoostEuroTeQ does. But I have a few more questions, and I'd actually like to start with a more personal question. What did you care about most when you first came to TalTech as a student?
Yeah, I think formally I was a student of TalTech for like one day.
Okay.
To defend my PhD thesis. So actually, I was not really a student here, but I actually came as a research assistant and a researcher. But I also did my kind of PhD research, partly affiliated with TalTech for quite some time. And I think one of the main things here is really this, as a social scientist, I could be in a traditional sort of comprehensive university.
Mm-hmm.
But in technological university, all of your topics get very, very quickly kind of linked or embedded with the technology questions. So you actually, by definition, do sort of social science research regarding technology and innovation. So I think this linkage was one of these things. And then over the years, I guess some sort of a feeling of place came also to your mind and activities, because then I moved to Tallinn, I started to live here, and then you start to think about, what is the role of the university in the city and so forth.
Talking of feeling of place, a couple of weeks ago I noticed something here at the Taltech campus. I saw a little flag behind a bush, this orange flag, and I was quite certain that this must be another courier robot running by, because these are just everywhere here. That was my instinct. And then I was surprised when a few seconds later, instead of a robot, I saw a bicycle cart. It wasn't a robot, it was a bicycle. And I found myself surprised that I'm seeing a bicycle, not a robot, which says that probably I'm at a technical university. But what kind of signs of sustainable transformation do you see on a daily basis here at the campus?
Well, I think one of the first things you see is that we talk much more about sustainability than a few years ago. We have our own sort of strategy now on working towards sustainability, and you see a little bit of this kind of a change. So we although we don't, maybe in the university not everybody accepts, but we are slowly taking away parking spaces and giving them to bicycle parking and whatnot. So you see these kind of little steps. If you walk on the street, you don't see that much, but if you go on some higher building, you see that the roofs tend to get solar panels and so on. So there is quite a lot of talk, quite a lot of banners and signs around, and a little bit of action. But I think one of the main sort of things that you see here or feel is actually the discussion. Mm-hmm. That actually the topic of sustainability, specifically in, I think, technological universities, might raise some very sort of hard questions and a lot of uncertainty. And then you have this kind of a feeling around that, what's our place in this world?
But if you compare that to campuses of other BoostEuroTeQ universities or other campuses you've spent a lot of time in, what else have you noticed as signs of the future?
I guess one side, it's very difficult to compare a place where you've been 15 years versus places you go for 6 months, 1 month or something like that. So I think what we see here is a lot of nature compared to many other places. So Estonian version of the nature, a lot of trees, a lot of forest nearby. But what you see is way too many cars. So I just think about the last places where I have been. Visiting for a longer period was in Seoul National University, in Kuala Lumpur, in University Malaya and stuff like that. I think the ratio of buses versus cars in the university campus is very, very off at the moment. But I mean, in that sense, you see that we have certain ways of doing it, but it's not comparable to other places because each campus is unique in its location. Our campus is a little bit off the city center. So by necessity, it's more, I think, car-centered at the moment. So you see other elements around, whereas in other countries where the campus would be more in the city center or closer to the transport hotspots, the environment would be very different. Right?
But in this case, it's quite difficult to pinpoint what exactly is the role of universities in sustainability, because all of them are in very different locations. So what would be some of the hygiene factors, or what makes an university stand out in terms of sustainability?
You mean technological universities?
Yes.
I think, one of the reasons also for the title of today's talk is that I think if you look at a big picture of things from historically, so technological universities are very unique in the sense that in the history of creating academic units, universities and stuff like that, we started with more like comprehensive universities. So this became an ideal. You have a balance of everything in the universities. And then suddenly we realized that this is not enough, and a few hundred years ago, we started to create technological universities that have a very kind of a clear mission in their mind, which is actually about, as we in Taltech call, solve real-life problems, but it's actually about focusing on more current issues around you. And technological universities, in that sense, originally were designed so much, you could say, not to advance the knowledge of the global frontier of knowledge, let's say it, but actually fix local socioeconomic issues. So I think that makes technological universities kind of unique, is that they're supposed to be much more locally embedded. They are supposed to be much more locally connected to the needs. Originally, the idea was that this should be like social economic needs, but when you look at what is valued by external stakeholders over the last 2 or 3 decades, it has become very much about sort of fulfilling or serving the needs of the industry. And this creates one of these challenges with sustainability, because when you think about sort of the traditional way of sustainability, one way of you could think about this as a kind of a smooth incremental transition, that we try to improve the systems step by step and try to make existing industrial systems more effective, more sort of energy saving and stuff like that. But I think sustainability transition, sustainability debate, especially after the European Green Deal, has become much more the idea of transformative, that we don't only need to make things more efficient, energy savings wise and stuff like that, but also maybe even rethink the fundamentals of the social technical systems we are dealing with. So it's not about making fossil cars more efficient or more sustainable by substituting fossil energy with electricity, but it's actually rethinking mobility system and maybe getting rid of privately owned cars, right? And this is where actually this legacy of the history of technological universities maybe comes to play, because you're not supposed to that much sort of be this kind of a radical transformer, but you should be collaborating with whatever the industry needs. And in current debate of sustainability, I think, the societal expectations and the policy expectations are a bit moving faster and or ahead of the industry willingness, especially in some countries. And this might create this kind of a clash, that how do we actually carry this role when we are supposed to work for the industry? Industry wants to do it smoothly. Policy, society, students might want to do much more radical transformations. And this is I think, a dilemma that most technological universities are currently facing.
So did all of that knowledge come through the BoostEuroTeQ project, or you had those hunches already before that?
Well, partly both. Well, my background is that I'm a professor of science and technology policy. So I study science, what scientists do. So I've been interested in this kind of dynamics of science and innovation for quite some time. But within the Boost, we particularly took this one as one of these kind of research angles, was to look at, so when we think about sustainability as becoming a topic for all of the organizations in society, then is there something unique about technological universities? This is where we realized this kind of a clash is there, which is not common in most organizations. And then we started to look sort of empirically as well. So what is happening in, I don't know, in Eindhoven, Munich, or in Copenhagen, or in Tallinn, to see whether there are commonalities, differences in this process.
All right. So but from what you have seen, do you think it is well possible to change the organizational culture of technical universities that may tend to be quite conservative in some areas?
Yes, but it's hard, is the answer. Specifically because of the kind of historical missions that we had talked about, because these missions lead you to build certain routines, certain cultures, certain ways of doing, and certain values, right? And then when some external driver wants to change this very quickly, you might run into difficulties. So what I mean by that is that, if, like in our case, we are looking at sort of 4 universities at this point. So Tallinn, the Danish Technological University, Tallinn University of Technology, and then Eindhoven University and Technical University of Munich, is that, it's not that these universities have never done with sustainability. You have kind of research groups, research streams, research projects dealing with sustainability. You could probably go into the beginning of when these universities formed, because some environmental issues haven't been always there. There has been a knowledgeable kind of focus on this kind of topics in modern sense of sustainability and climate crisis already from 2000s. But after the European Green Deal, all of these 4 universities more or less took it much more as a strategic approach. So they tried to build one form of another, a strategy or a strategic goals, action plans, whether they are like through ESG reports or some kind of strategic planning activities, they have either offices or networks of academics who are focusing on thinking what the sustainability means to the university, and they have also administrative units. But when you see, it's kind of a layering. So you add this on top of existing missions or directions that you have, and that makes it super difficult, because the new layer that you add is very different from the previous three. And if you don't approach the kind of the culture and values underneath it, or you don't think about them, you might run into actually difficulties. So what we notice is that in many cases, we did interviews with people who are actually kind of leading this process, either academically or administrative side of the activities. And in all of the universities, I guess the main conclusion is that it seems to be harder than people thought or assumed, just because of the kind of the way the culture, the values, the processes are being set up. So you need to probably not only emphasize sustainability, but you need to also figure out how do you embed this into the culture and processes.
Who do you mean by you? Or put it in another way, what's the role of the university leadership in unpacking the processes and installing new processes that involve sustainability in a different way that support the transformative mission?
Yeah, okay, but by you, I mean actually we, to some extent. So every actor in the university. So what we see is that, if you look at the history, right, we have had this kind of bottom-up initiatives beforehand, as I mentioned. So research groups themselves taking a direction to environmental issues in certain fields or sustainability topics as well. But this is kind of, this kind of slow-moving incremental evolution of these topics. Then we have had a process where university strategic management in terms of rectorates or whatever is the strategic or leadership team called in different universities have tried to take the lead on this, and try to give a direction, try to keep this kind of process on. And now what you ask, so what we see in our research is that it's oftentimes it seems that everybody tried to do it quite quickly, strategy, action plan, and then we see implementation happening. And then what happens is that the implementation doesn't happen because you haven't taken this as a core of your activity, but it's like a separate strategy, separate stream of activities, a few people put in charge of coordinating these things and stuff like that. And then the little city that we talked about beforehand doesn't really pick it up. So I think the role of leadership is, or the university management, is actually to kind of legitimize this direction, to keep it as a core value of the organization and take it one by one into each of the activities, to the education, to the research, to the building of the campus and stuff like that. And you cannot delegate that out too quickly, because otherwise people with no kind of political or leadership role in the universities need to fight the fights of values in the universities and convince people that we should deal with these things and so forth. So I think there is this, let's say, a role of triggering this process or starting it, but it needs to be much more kind of holding hands in this process than maybe other domains, because you are trying to actually change also the habits or the ways of working to the much more granular level than with other activities maybe.
Thank you. You mentioned quite a few times expectations from the society and so forth. So where do those expectations actually come from, and what kind of legitimacy does the university need for such kind of a transformation?
Well, I think with technological universities, you can say that there's like, I don't know, I'm not going to say you a number at ex ante, because I'm now going to list them and we know the number after I finish listing. So if you think about, most of these universities are public universities. So one side is really sort of this kind of political or policy expectations that come through government strategies, that come through research funding rules or whatnot, or educational funding rules, right? Then there is, of course, students, right? So this is their main, we are not here working for ourselves, or we are not here working for the rectors, but we are working here for students, right, as well. So what the students expect. But then technological universities, and specifically with the focus on fixing problems and stuff like that, you also have the kind of local communities, and more importantly, also the industrial interest, or sort of the private sector interest, as we discussed. And I think, you need to kind of one of the challenges for the technological universities is to find a balance between these things. Because, as I said, sometimes policy and certain policy expectations move faster than others, right? So technical universities have today this dilemma that you need to both do technology transfer and sustainability. But sustainability questions actually, or sustainability goal poses the challenge that not all technology transfer is good. Because many of the universities that we are studying here have faced this issue that at some point, some other stakeholder groups say that, hey, but your technology transfer goes to only fossil industries or predominantly fossil industries. How is this sustainability? Maybe you should kind of rethink this, right? And this is a very painful kind, almost like a fundamental dilemma for technological universities, because serving industry is supposed to be a thing that you do even without questioning. This is the core of your mission. And now somebody from the side says that, hey, but there is good technology transfer and bad technology transfer, good innovation and bad innovation. And what's your take on this? And I think this is one of these challenges that we need to kind of figure out, because there is definitely more legitimacy still, especially the business side expectations in society regarding more sort of entrepreneurial university lens, this kind of technology transfer to wherever the problems are. You're not supposed to, as an academia, say that certain industries are good or bad and we are not dealing with you. But then at the same time, students sometimes say that we really don't want to study if you work too much with sort of bad industries, if you can call them like that.
Okay.
Or policymakers would say that, we will not finance your these and these initiatives if you don't exit from these and these initiatives. And this basically is this fundamental dilemma. Some universities that we study have gone through this process, or are in the middle of this, and others haven't really yet got there. But I guess this will come in the coming years.
I think this is a good time to move into the operational level. The concept of problem method fit we have covered numerous times in the courses that we have given together. But what is the proper method for this task, and what's the role of co-creation in finding the edge for doing transformative sustainability transformation?
That's actually a very good question, in the sense that if you think about the topic of governance, or how do we actually do strategies and implement them and stuff like that, then in broad base we have in society basically like 3 ideal types. You do these things through kind of authority and power, rules, regulations, hierarchy, classic strategic management elements and stuff like that. Second side is that you try to do this to some sort of kind of marketizational activities. So you try to incentivize either individuals or organizations through performance contracts, performance agreements and stuff like that to do things. And then the most popular current times is this idea that given that wicked problems that we are dealing with, such as sustainability, are so complex that we don't know what they are in the beginning, we shouldn't pretend that we know. And we shouldn't pretend that then we can do nice contracts or incentive systems or nice regulations, but instead we should actually focus on co-creation. And you have like a very different terminology here. Somebody says it should be experimental, others say it should be transformative. There are also some people who even call it generative governance, which I guess sounds very much like generative AI or something like that. But the idea is that you kind of build platforms. Instead of pretending that you know, you build platforms to learn together about an issue, about the challenge, and then see what is actually the feasible way forward in your particular cultural or sort of historical context, right? So one of these assumptions that we have as good management is that you should kind of do co-creation in this process. You should enable people to come and join and try to figure out what is the specific problems, challenges we face in a region, in a city, and then think how can a university also internally contribute. So you have co-creation about sort of what are the sustainability challenges we are dealing with, and then how do we try to tackle them. But I think one of the lessons that we get here, but this is not only from the Boost project, but in general from my research, is that we underestimate how expensive and how hard co-creation is, because it actually takes quite a lot of time to come to the consensus or some sort of common understanding. And then what happens in this process is that you need to be willing to give away power, right?
Right.
So you need to actually, in order for co-creation to work, you need to actually give power to the citizens, to the students, or whoever, to actually go decide with you which way to go. And this is something that, if you again go back to the kind of historical legacies of what we have considered as good way of running technological universities and stuff like that, that might become an issue, because we are supposed to give the power away to the business side of things much more than to the students or social side of expectations in society. And I think that makes co-creation a promising idea, but very hard to implement, and it requires also the university leadership to come to the grips with the question of giving away power to other actors in the ecosystem to go design the directions and stuff like that.
You mentioned a few ways of how co-creation can work, and that also that it's expensive, and it means that you may have to give away power. In that quite mixed picture, what would be your personal preference on how to try out co-creation? Like, what is an idea that you would want to try out to show the rest of the Taltech campus that this is possible?
I think, if you leaving aside universities, there would be many different interesting things to do, but let's focus on sustainability and technological universities. I think, there are two things that should be done, right? So, especially when you look at, for example, Taltech and where we are as a location, we should open up our campus to the local communities around us, because we basically have now built a little city here in Mustamäe. We all commute. Majority of people, I think, come from not Mustamäe, especially professors and stuff like that. And then we leave in the evening, and then the campus is dead, right? So we should actually give the place to the local communities around here and engage them much more in this kind of environment, because now we have like highways around us, not highways, okay, it's not. No, sorry. Those who haven't been in Tallinn, is actually local highways, small streets that block entrance to the community and stuff like that. But we should actually make it much more sort of livable place for the local communities, in order for them to actually come and say that, our problems here in Mustamäe are these and that, and why aren't you dealing with these problems, instead of trying to fix something in other districts or regions of Estonia. But I think the other side really is to, regarding this kind of power thing, is I think we should give much more role to students in university, and not the way we have used to do it, which is that just engage students in university strategic decision bodies and say that, they are in the university decision-making body, they have 1/3 of votes, they are included, but actually give them the resources to try out, to test out, to actually work in this campus as well as almost owners or designers of this environment here, and then design, draft what they want to do. Because if you look at, for example, Taltech, so some of the most successful things that our engineering students are doing is like, student formula competitions and stuff like that. But these are all global topics. Right,
Yes.
they are not so much about fixing Mustamäe or making Mustamäe cool again, or whatever you could put the term here in Tallinn. But it's about actually how do you make the local ecosystem, local kind of environment much more sort of dynamic. And through that process, I think you can actually learn quite a bit about sort of the local socioeconomic needs, possibilities, and where things might be going. Because I think at the moment we all kind of use this campus as a place to come and go away, but we don't treat this as a place that transforms society or economy.
It reminds me of a time when I was involved in a experiment of deep hanging out. That was like a couple of hours in a park, just looking at people and seeing what they are doing, and having short interviews with them about what brings you here, what are you doing here, what would you like to do here. And that gave us some ideas on how to transform that park into a more into a place that you actually want to come to and spend time in different parts of the day. But let's say co-creation actually works, and all of those opportunities lead to something. So imagine yourself into 2030. So what will Taltech and other BoostEuroTeQ campuses look like? How will sustainability will have manifested itself a few years from now?
It's a good question. I think if you think about campuses as little cities, not much happens in actually 5 to 6 years in terms of physical build-up, right? You can renovate a few buildings, especially in financial constraints most universities face. You can probably change a little bit of how the space is used and stuff like that. So I think you will not see that much of a physical visualization or change of this. But I think what you could see is kind of a mindset change within this framework, or how we actually approach this and what will be ongoing in 2030. And I think what I would like to see, especially in I think what makes us different, for example, from some other universities in Europe is that we are a campus university at the city center, right? So when we look at Taltech, I think we would really like to see this as a kind of a new center of not of parking, but life and community here. I mean, you need to park somewhere to come here and stuff like that, but I think it shouldn't be a place that people come, spend from 8 to 5 to work, study and stuff like that, then leave. Or actually in the university here, it's like from 8 to 9, you come and study and work here and then you leave, but it becomes much more livable as a place. And probably that means actually it's not livable, not only for our members of the university, students and workers, but actually the community from around will take control of this place a bit more in order to make it their own. Because at the moment, I think this is one of the missing elements here. So you would need to see a little bit different behavior from the students and the locals, but local sort of staff, but also I think the external community needs to take the university as a place.
You're right. We're coming to the end of this podcast. I'd like to ask one more question and then a few closing comments. But what will the students care about in 2030? Will their values be much different compared to when you came to the campus?
Well, the students of 2030 are, how old are they today?
14.
Let's say they're 14. Of course, they will have different expectations. They will probably, the generational shift and stuff will be much more sort of gradual. So the students of 2030 will be a little bit more different, and the ones in 2035 will be even much more different. But I think this is something that universities, when they have this kind of long-term sustainability goals and stuff like that, they have in mind. They should actually think about that or plan for that, right? And I think, for me at least, there is this question that this is not only the lens of sustainability, but sometimes we call this also about sort of kind of twin transition we are seeing in society, that we have in parallel this idea of sustainability, and then we have also digitalization happening, right? So I saw this morning that there was some statistics or survey made that about 9% of Estonian population is using ChatGPT, right? Wow. So we are like 4th in that survey in the world. Bhutan is number 1 with 15% of using it, right?
And they're a happy nation.
Yeah, but if this is already like 10-15% of people using this, then this will definitely change the behavior, but also new generations adopt new ways of digitality, if we can call this. And then I think the university needs to figure this out, that will that actually the student of the future and the engineer of the future be sort of half digital, half localized person, that actually we change the way education works, and we don't need the campus anymore from Monday to Friday for education, but the formats might actually transform quite differently. And not because what we plan as a universities or what we design in our sustainability strategies, but how this kind of digitalization, digital change might actually affect what the outsiders want. And maybe by 2035, the interactions here are much more difficult. That, you could think about, I guess a nice proxy case would be a library, right? So, original libraries were very strict and constrained places where to enter you had to have a card, and then you were allowed access to the data, right? Today, most modern libraries are like a super open places, and maybe they have a few pictures of books, but the concept of a library is very much different. So it's like a barn of data or something like that. So there is somewhere you can get a book. Mostly you get it in a digital format. There's a lot of people to talk to and learn from. And then there is also some kind of observations to be made. You can do deep hanging out and stuff like that, as you mentioned. But I think the future of university might look very similar, that maybe the teaching takes place or in another platform or in another place, not in a university campus anymore, at least part of it. Engineering universities are unique in this sense that we will always have much more place-based learning, as long as labs and stuff like that are not digital or virtual, or on chip or something like that. But as long as it's there, you will still have, but it might be a smaller amount of teaching and much more of deep hanging out in the campuses and other forms of interactions that might be coming. So I think that will be an interesting thing to observe. And I think that's another, like a next layer of challenge for the universities. We are now facing or struggling with sustainability, but next phase is also this kind of linking all of this with digitality or new forms of digitality that are popping up in society. And I think it will be an exciting future to see.
Well, I think so too. Thank you for an intense conversation and making yourself available for some of those curiosity-driven questions. We talked today about how and whether tech universities can become transformative, and some key takeaways from me are that from day one you have been very curious in how science and innovation actually works, and for that reason you're always available here on this campus if you're not traveling to other campuses around the world. We also learned that at least one key for tech universities to become transformative is to remind themselves of the mission that they were created for, and how to unpack some of the layers that have been summoning up over the past 100 years. Is there anything else that you would like to leave the listeners and viewers of this podcast with as the final remark for today?
Maybe a sort of additional element here I would add is that started with the question of this transformations and stuff like that, and engineering of the future. As a social scientist, as I always have to say that, or end this as well, is that I think we need to think about what we do as a university a little bit differently. That's the kind of starting point. So it's we used to. I think it's a bit of a caricature or a bit of a straw man, but the general assumption is that engineering science or engineering is very much efficiency oriented, right? So we would try to improve existing processes, existing systems, and stuff like that. But I think when we talk about this kind of transformations, be it sustainability or digital that comes or is happening on the side, we need to think about sort of socio-technical transformations, right? So we need to actually, the engineer of the future is a socio-technical engineer, not technical engineer, I think. And this would allow us to have a conversation between different domains, different fields, to actually think about this kind of transformations. And this, for example, kind of boils down also into what kind of research is being done in the university. And in the literature, that's always said that, we used to think that innovation happens through technical pilots, right? So you do research, you do innovation actions and stuff like that, and then you do a technical pilot to learn whether a technology works in real life. But we should increasingly focus on socio-technical experiments, right? So we actually bring people into the experiment before they are introduced with a new solution, right? And I think this is also a fundamental mindset change that we need to face. So I think this is some element that is one way also universities need to kind of transform their view of how do we do things in these nice little villages inside of bigger cities that we are.
Very good. Professor Erkki Karo, thank you for joining us for this podcast. I'm still Mikk Vainik, and this was the BoostEuroTeQ podcast with TalTech Professor Erkki Karo.